Hi, I'm Lamberto Ceballos. I'm a writer and also a retired certified public accountant. I began writing when I was in the elementary and the high school because I like to write the themes assigned to us by our grammar and composition teacher, like how I spent my vacation. But in high school, I became the features editor of the Light of Lapu-Lapu, the official school organ of Abiliana National School. I took because there was a vocational course, journalism, and I took it. And I became the features editor of the Light of Lapu-Lapu when I was in the fourth year. And my first story and my first poem in English was published in the Light of Lapu-Lapu. And later on, I became a member of Ludabi, the Lobas Dagang Bisaya. And there I have touched shoulders with the lubasang mga magsusulat like Laurian Onabia, Temistocles Adlawan, Grimeries. They were the frontliners of the Cebuano literature. Also, Sir Martin Abiliana. I wrote my short story in Cebuano during my spare time during Sundays when I was not so busy with the household chores. But I give time, even how little, to writing. Even in the wee hours of the night when I had an idea, I had to rise up and put the idea into writing. Even if during that time I cannot write that idea, time will come when I sit before my typewriter and make the idea fruition. Even when I was married, I keep on writing, even if it is only not frequent. I wrote my novels little by little. Even one paragraph or two paragraphs a night, it's enough for me. I wrote a novel, mga 15 chapters, but it took me 2 years to finish the novel before I submitted it to the Bisaya magazine for publication. In 1969, we founded the Batalanong Hanad sa Dagang Incorporated. It was an organization of the Cebuano writers based in Manila, Visayas, and Mindanao. But later on, when Frank Alporque was assigned already in Mindanao, he founded the Batalad Mindanao. That is why we have now Batalad Sugbo to identify us from Batalad Mindanao. When I write stories, the characters I use sometimes from my childhood experience with my neighbors, classmates, more or less to people the stories I write. In choosing the plot or the storyline for my poems or stories, more or less I choose the simple stories of the ordinary people, the common people. These stories are based also in my experience. Regarding the stories, especially sent for during a contest held, especially in Batalad, where I was several times a judge. I chose these stories that more or less has the so-called social milieu, the stories of from the sacrifices. I like the stories, sacrifices made by a character to achieve his dream. I found during my stints as a judge, I found there were many short stories written very well, but the story does not appeal to my judgment because the theme is not so relevant to the times. The stories that stood out are those stories that were thought-provoking. So that when after reading the stories, the reader can either accept or upload the stories or just shove it away. And I also and I entered the Palangka contest after several years. In the year 2003 siguro, I won second prize, and the title of my story is Hunger in Nayawak, second prize. Yeah. I continued participating in the contest of Palangka almost every year. But there were years that I did not won, and in 2006 I won first prize with with the title of my story, Ang Ongo sa San Pilar. That was 2006. Until in 2015, I won first prize with the title Tuba. The participation in the writing contest by writers, for myself, I participate in literary contests to prove that I can write something memorable. The monetary remuneration I do not consider greatly. I consider it as a measure that I have written something worthwhile, and maybe the readers can relate to that. Even if one reader, if he reads my poem or short story and he appreciated the theme, I consider myself successful.
I am Hope Sabanpanyu from the Cebuano Studies Center. I know Lam Ceballos from many years way back when he was part of the Kapulungan Project, which actually interviewed different Cebuano writers for a book compilation. And from that interview, I remembered his creative writing began in high school when he wrote for The Light of Lapu-Lapu, which was the school organ then of the Abeliana National School. And then he also wrote for the Today's Carolinian of the University of San Carlos when he was doing his accountancy degree. Lamberto Ceballos was also a writing fellow at the prestigious Siliman National Writers Summer Workshop in Dumaguete City, where he was under the tutelage of the Tiempos, Dr. Edilberto Tiempo, and the late national artist for literature, Dr. Edith Tiempo. And I think in 1970, his poem, I think it was titled The Monument, garnered the second prize in the poetry contest in English that was sponsored by the Cebu Arts Council. And another poem, which was Saturday Night is Also Lonely, that was the title, Saturday Night is Also Lonely, was included in the Home Life Anthology, which was edited by the late Dr. Leoncio Derriada. Ceballos received a grant from the Cultural Center of the Philippines for Cebuano poetry for his poem, Ang Libod Suroy nga mga bata sa Dalan Kolon ug uban pa. And actually his story, Tinggutom sa Nayawak, which is a title story for the collection that Trizer, Mansueto, and I translated from Cebuano and English into English, and I edited that collection. It placed second, that short story placed second in the Don Carlos Palanca Memorial Awards in literature for the Cebuano short story category in 2003. And then, because of that award, the Cebu City Council approved the Resolution 03-1901 in September 2003, I believe so, as recognition for the contribution of Ceballos to Cebuano language and culture. Sometime in 2006, one of his beautiful stories, Ungo sa San Pilar, or which we would translate to The Witch of San Pilar. Although, of course, the witch here is actually a man. Or you cannot call this person a sorcerer. Won first place in the Don Carlos Palanca Memorial Awards category, again for Cebuano short story. And actually, that year, 2008, showed a harvest of acclaims for Ceballos. There were several stories. I can't recollect all of the titles, but some that I remember is Ang Tinuod nga Pagkatao ni Amadix. It was third place. And his poem, Nahimo Akong Magbabalak, won first prize. And another short story, Mga Higayon ang Pagbaws. May Higayon ang Pagbaws, got second prize in the first short story writing contest that was sponsored by the Lunsayng Bisaya. If we talk about his works, Ceballos' words are a very strong indication of the power of community or comunitas in his writing in the Cebuano language, because he has not only been the writer who has addressed the topic in his writing, as authors have already considered the theme of community. If we go all the way back to Vicente Soto, when we talk about Maming, the first Cebuano short story, and pull it all the way to Fausto Dueño's Labaong Magtutudlo, and then even to Ricardo Pataling Hug's Itom nga Sabado. So we have all these stories of community. And within the last century, Cebuano literature has been inspired by the issue of community, and I think it still continues to be inspired. And the Cebuano community is one such area. So the topic of community usually appears as a cause or effect of more popular topics like feminism, like migration, and even language. So the number of critiques based solely on community as a traditional unit is not much. And I should just tell you that at the time I was thinking, because Trizer and I decided to translate Lamberto Ceballos, but prior to that, I had already been translating other works, Gremer Chan Reyes, Lina Espina Moore. And at that time, I thought that focusing on just one writer for such a study of community will be very difficult, considering the wealth of Cebuano literature that celebrates and condemns the community. It is very clear right away that if criticism of the community in Cebuano literature is to be made important, then one must begin with an author who is a figure of Cebuano literature and well known for producing community-themed work, right? So then I thought, okay, let's choose someone who is canonical in order to reveal the importance of that theme in community, or the theme of community in the genre. And now, Lamberto Ceballos is one such writer.
Regarding new writers, as judge of literary contest and as editor, I found that the new writers have the experience is not enough, because I noticed, especially in the dialogue of the short story, not as actual as they are used by real people. Sometimes even, for example, a farmer, he presumes himself as philosopher, but actually not sufficient for him to be such. And the chronology also of the scene. Sometimes a character was sitting, and then suddenly in the next paragraph, he was already in the kitchen. So there is no, I found something missing there. He was sitting, and then suddenly he was in the kitchen. First, he must rise from where he sat down and then walk to the kitchen. I found it abrupt. That is also one pitfall that the new writer has to overcome. Another, the preparation, especially this preparation for the reader. For example, the principal character likes to kill the contrabida. When they met at the place, the bida character pulled out his gun and shot the contrabida. But in the previous narratives, there was no mention of a gun that he carried. Where did he get? Where did he get? Where did he? Where did he get the gun? So, preparation for the reader, the writer should have put the gun somewhere before the killing, somewhere the principal character found it in a drawer, and then he brought it along with him in order to kill the contrabida. Oh, that is one. No preparation for the reader. That is also one pitfall that new writers has to overcome. And another thing, this jokes ex machina thing. The new writer writes about his character to have revenge on his enemies. And the writer has a problem how to end his story. So he made out since the contrabida might be killed by road accident or traffic mishap ba. And then there is also a situation that the new writer has a difficulty in ending his story. So he sort of jokes ex machina. Either the character commits suicide or like that. As to the Filipino writers, I have three idols in B.M. Gonzales, Francisco Arciliana, and Edelberto Timpo, because I like also their narratives. Besides the regular stories I write also children's stories. That's why I consider myself an exponent of that genre. I have even wrote an essay about the neglect of the old writers about the children's stories. They had not propagated it. For me, the Cebuano literature will continue to develop, especially now that there are young writers who are encouraged to write in the native language. Unlike before, when we were young, only few of us young writers aspiring to develop the Cebuano literature, as experienced by me when I joined Ludabi during the convention. The faction of Batalad, composed of young writers. That was why when we were members of the Ludabi, the Batalad young writers, Batalad was not yet organized, but we already grouped inside the Ludabi organization. We are a group. The late President, Ludabi President Vicente Abangan even give us the title that although we are already Bathalad, pero under the banner of the we are not yet formally organized, but we consider already our Bathalad. We are already the Batalan ng Halad sa Dagang. The late Vicente Abangan dubbed us the literary arms of Ludabi. We group together and we discuss our writings and we support each other. I consider myself successful as a writer. The first thing is winning the contest. That already I consider myself successful. But beyond the winning the story, I think I can be successful if my writing, short story or poem can be read by many and can relate what is the experience I had written in the story or the experience I had writing my experience in form of a poem. So that is why I remember Attorney Dionisio Gabriel, our a writer also in English. He wrote in English, but he wrote 2 stories or 1 poem only in Cebuano. He said that a pure poem appeals to only one reader, you are successful. That is his word. I believe in him. Winning the contest is also a criterion because it is measured there that you can really write. To the young writers now, I advise them to continue writing and to record everyday life of the people around them and how the people feels toward society, politics, the economics of the nation. Just continue writing because actually writing can move people. Although writing is also for entertainment. And even now, I am now 81 going on 82. I still write. But only when a good storyline comes to my mind, I write a serious short story. But I advise the young writers not to consider the remuneration. Consider how for them sort of self-expression, their poems or short stories.
Hi, I am John Dante. I am a writer for the Cebuanos. I am writing fantasy stories, creating epic landscapes, adventure tales in the lens of a Cebuano. I know Nyor Lam because he is often been talked about by the Bathalad members during Tagay sessions. It was last year when I first met him during the Bathalad workshop in the Rizal Museum, and I did not expect him to be a small man, but he has this countenance of a like like a loving father when he looked at us creating, making the workshop possible. I felt he was proud at that moment. I was not, when I came, when I began writing, I have started late already. So my readings on your lamb is already very few. It's not wide. I have read three of his balak, which can be found. It is published in Kabisdak by Nyormay Cobenieta, which I can read right now. It's not too long. It's quite a lovely poem, no? And very apt for the weather right now. The title is Mga Suwab sa Ulan. May kabugnaw ang alindahaw nga gianod sa huyuhoy ug mitugpa sa subo kong nawong. Miagpas ang malumong mga talibgos sa hinay nga paglupad sa mga habo-habo. Lagbas sa akong tambuanan, nalantaw ko nga may kasubo sab nga gihambin ang langit. Daw miduyog sa dughan kong nagsubo, kay gibinlan mog hait nga basuni sa kasakit. Mitibi ang langit, midagtom ang panganod, ang kaguol midagom sulod sa akong galamhan. Gibuhian sa langit ang mga taligsik nga misugod, paglumos sa nagbangutan kong balatian. Mga kamot sa kasakit, mikumot ning dughan, sa imong pagbiya nga sa atong saadwa mutuman. Ang mga mata ko karon sa mga luha, gibiawan, gihilap sa hait nga mga suwab sa ulan. Lamberto Ceballos. The poem is quite striking to me, even as a young writer. And there is a clear generational gap between us, but he still speaks to me directly in such a way that there is a resurgence of profound emotion that is not only real in our generation, but is also quite real in their generation, and it rings true even until now. And I'm quite amused by it that such ideas transcend through time, and Lamberto Ceballos is able to profoundly deliver that. Nyormel Aliego, one of the founders of Bathalad, once sent me a chat on Messenger. It was a long chat, but what I could quite remember is that he purposefully said that Nyormel, Nyorlam Ceballos, and Nyorbutch Bandilio, three of the remaining old writers of Bathalad, is supposed to be the stabilizers of the group. And Nyorbutch also responded to that chat through Kevin Lagunda. And it was quite amazing to see these old personas, these ancient sages talking through us, sending messages through us as if we were channels of some divine intervention, telling us that they are there ready to support Bathalad and Cebuano literature to become the stabilizers that us younger writers can continue to strive for the development and proliferation of Cebuano literature. Lam Ceballos, despite being old, is still on the active lookout for new poems, short stories to be published in Super Balita. I was able to publish there through him. I sent him emails, and he also encouraged me to look for younger writers. That's why I've been going through many universities, giving lectures, and telling them that they can send to Super Balita through Lam Ceballos' email. So yes, he is still actively looking for new voices for Cebuano literature, and he wants to publish them.
My name is Malu Aloro, and I'm the incumbent vice chair of the Women in Literary Arts Cebu. And I'm also currently working with the Commission on Population and Development. It's a regional government agency. I know Mr. Lam Ceballos because he's one of our panelists in the workshops, no? Like Willa has a lot of workshops in poetry, in flash fiction, creative nonfiction, and other literary works. And I remember, I think that was in 2021 when he was one of our panelists in Binisaya Poetry, Balak. And it was the first time that I really met him in person. A very cute young man, no? Very unassuming, but he's really a good writer, di ay. So I was very happy at the time to meet him. And I also learned that he's actually one of the founding, pioneering officers of Bathalad, Sugbo. So probably without him and the other officers way back, we would not have Bathalad with us, no? Because Willa Cebu and Bathalad Sugbo are really partners together, no, in the literary workshops, in the literary scene, especially here in Cebu City. There's a poem that I really enjoyed. No? This is authored by Mr. Lam Ceballos, and I saw this in Kabisdak. No? And it's entitled, Mga Hulma sa Panganod. Sa akong pag-inusara, ako nanambo sa bintana. Mihangad ko sa langit sa puting mga panganod. Ikaw nga nagpahiyom, tinaw nga akong nakita. May sakayang linayagan, gipadpad sa huna-huna. Gipulihan sa mga kabayong kusog na naglumba. Sa akong pag-inusara, ako nanambo sa bintana. May dakong langgam, misakdap sa tunga-tunga, sa sakayang may layag, ug sa tuling mga kabayo. Ikaw nga nagpahiyom, tinaw nga akong nakita. Nakita ko si Cupido nga nagdala sa iyang pana. Nangita sa kasing-kasing nga uhaw sa gugma. Sa akong pag-inusara, ako nanambo sa bintana. Daghang butang sa puting panganod namugna. Lakip na ang mga anino sa mga taong naglakaw. Ikaw nga nagpahiyom, tinaw nga akong nakita. Di ko mahimong hikalimtan ang imong larawan nga nahimutang na sa pedestal ning handurawan. Sa akong pag-inusara, ako nanambo sa bintana. Ikaw nga nagpahiyom, tinaw nga akong nakita. Mauto ang iyang balak. That was his poem. And I think this talks about, love at first sight, or probably love spoken truly in the heart. And Mr. Lam Ceballos' heart is probably filled with love, no, for women, especially for beautiful women in his time, and for women of his generation. So this one is a good poem for me because I also love poems.
My name is Nino Agustin Loyola, a professor in University of San Carlos. I've first read of him in this book, Kapulungan, and I've read his interviews, and of course read the short story also included here. Well, considering his age, he looks old, but he looks very wise, and he talks calmly, and he smiles a lot. But when he reads, the words just come out like magic. So from there, I've really seen, or I rather noticed that he is really writer who's mastered his craft. Okay, I do notice that he does really depict very local setting in his stories. For example, on that short story, Ang Driver o Ang Teacher, it's a very localized setting, especially in his hometown in Dalaget, with very realistic characters. It talks about morals and values of human beings. So basically, how to have a heart of gold in the face of the society, the community, and reality in general. But what I am interested in his story being featured here, Biya sa lasang sa tagas nga mga building, or translated as Leave the Skyscraper Jungle, translated by Dr. Hope. This is quite a different take on his writing. Although the local setting is still there, especially there, I believe this is set in Colon because of the buildings downtown. He has this very interesting depiction of death, especially being portrayed as a cat inside the abandoned building. So that for me is very interesting because it appears that Cebuano literature needs this kind of understanding or meditation on the so-called thanatology, or the study of death or understanding of death. Because I noticed that us Filipinos tend to shun away from conversations on death, and and how much more if there's really a character of death in the story, and plus it's being depicted as a cat in a story in an abandoned building. So if you can imagine the imagery, it's really there. The story is not that long, but it can actually tell you a very vivid picture of the story and the imagery itself, plus the characterizations and the symbolisms. I'm going to read a sample or an excerpt in Lam's work titled Biya sa lasang sa tagas nga building, or translated as Leave the Skyscraper Jungle. All of a sudden, he changed his mind. He would not commit suicide. He would wait for his death at home. He would go after Vicente and Tibay, who were probably swimming in the lake now. But something meowed by the floor. He turned and saw the cat staring intently at him. He saw the cat change form. It became an old man who wore black and carried a scythe. He slid from his sight only to realize how quickly he tore through the air down. He heard the screams of the people, and his body fell to the concrete below. He could not understand the pain that he felt, and then followed an endless darkness. Well, considering that we are now in the contemporary era in Cebuano literature, I would say that Lam is one of the living classics. Basically, he's been writing like how many decades ago, and his other contemporaries like Ernesto Lariosa, Melchor Iboran, Temistocles Adlawan have sadly passed away, but nonetheless, they are all considered literary classics in the Cebuano literature canon. And fortunately, Lam is still writing and still active in the literary scene. So he is, in fact, a living classic. And most importantly, since he has been publishing and has won many awards throughout his writing career, needless to say, he is definitely an OG of the Cebuano writers. So if you publish your works, if you are a young writer and you're publishing your works, for example, in Bisaya Magazine or other anthologies together with him, it would really be a great honor in that case.
I'm Jeremiah Bundok. I have been part of Bathalad since I was in college way back the late 90s. And about that time, that's also the time which I was introduced to the stalwarts of Bathalad, no? And that includes Nyorlam, Lamberto Ceballos. The first time I met Nyorlam, I could already sense that is the quiet type, no? And somehow, as opposed to the other members of Bathalad, which was quite animated, rowdy to a point, and at the time, the Bathalad sessions always had we don't read poetry only or stories, but most of the time to see drinking sessions with the members. So even that, even after consuming a good amount of liquor or beer, Nyorlam was still quiet, and when he speaks, it always have something of he always speaks with substance. I could see that he's very economical with his words. No, but for us, the young members of Bathalad back then, Nyorlam serves as a father figure for us. He was very gentle, always have a kind word to say to us, and he always says his mind also when he reads our work. He give us suggestions and comments, critique on how we can further improve our writing. That would also explain Nyorlam's longevity, you know, because he was really he knows how to take care of himself, even back then. Despite a backdrop of a beer drinking poets and writers around him, he was always very, very disciplined when it comes to that. Nyorlam, as we know, no, has been one of the important figures in Bathalad. He won numerous prizes here and even in the National in Manila. And he's also one of the very few who are Hall of Famers in Bathalad. The Bathalad Hall of Fame, by the way, is given to those who have won, I think, at least five awards, whether local or national. So that's how important Nyorlam is, not only to Bathalad, but to the literary community, the Cebuano literary community in general. Nyorlam's work definitely elevates the Cebuano literature to what it is right now. And it will, I'm sure, further elevate it in the future. And it would be a good reference also for those of us who are writing after them, and especially to the young generations right now who are introduced to our brand of Cebuano literature.
My name is Noel Sanchez Villaflor. I'm a member of Bathalad Sugbo for the last 2 decades plus. And I had the privilege of meeting Lamberto Ceballos in 1998 when I first joined a poetry reading he had somewhere in Capital Site, and I think he's one of the reasons that really got me into poetry, along with his dear friend Nyor Erning Lariosa, alongside Nyor Ion Auman. They're actually a triumvirate, and you cannot talk about Cebuano literature without talking about the three of them. And I had this privilege to witness them as both as individuals and as poets and writers. Nyor Lam is what you might call a pillar of Cebuano literature. So he's more into nurturing new writers and less of critiquing their work. And if he does give criticism, it's the very constructive kind, the one that encourages writers to pursue this beautiful craft. And I think it's just fitting that he's been the literary editor of Super Balita for the longest time, where he invites, he keeps a tradition of poetry writing or balak writing alive, in a sense vibrant. He himself contributes greatly to the publication, and I can only imagine the kind of how huge his body of work is. So it's completely the opposite of how he is in person, because Nyor Lam is, as small as his frame is, he's larger than life, and even larger than the sum of his contributions to Cebuano literature. One thing I've noticed about his work, he has his prose is, in a way, it follows his cadence, his gait while walking. It's what I observed from him from when he walks into the room in the office, because we are office mates at Sunstar Cebu. We were office mates for also the longest time, and I'd observed how calm and slow he walks into a room, as if there is no worry in the world. But I've noticed that the way he walks shows also in his body of work. So there's so much peace and serenity in, particularly in his poetry, and it's filled with images of looking out the window, looking into the horizon, and looking into far distances that only a writer of his caliber can put into words. And also his diminutive frame should not fool you, because as a writer he has very powerful imagery. Like in a poem that I like so much from him, it was published in Super Balita sometime in 2019. From memory, it's called Karong buntag gisud-ong ko ang kapunaw-punawan. Roughly translated to, this morning I gazed into the horizon, and the line goes, ang adlaw, he was talking about how the sun, he was looking at the sunrise, and he was talking about how the sun rose from the horizon. He said something, the lines in Cebuano were like, ang adlaw daw kahil is an orange. Ang adlaw daw kahil is a citrus fruit. Ang adlaw daw kahil nagikumot sa gamhanang kamot. Misidlit ang bidlisiw ug ang kahayag ni kuyanap sa dagat. So to translate, so the sun to him in that poem is like an orange crushed by the hands of a higher power, and then when crushing that piece of fruit, all the light spread in the horizon into the ocean. It was such a beautiful image that that I always bring with me when I go to places. So this is the kind of writing that Nyor Lam has. Sometimes it's just there's a cadence, there's a slow pace that takes you to another place, and then suddenly he just crushes you with his words.
I am Bus Bandilio, and I wish to talk today about my friend Lam Ceballos. I know Lam all the way back to the 70s. First time I met him was, I guess, in the mid-70s. He was one of the stalwarts of Batalan. I was still young then. I was 18 or something. And I started going with the group. And Lam was one of the members who impressed me because he was quite spoken. He was very reserved, and I found it quite unusual that he was actually an accountant. I mean, he is an accountant, and he writes poetry and fiction. Those days, he still wrote in English. We started a poetry magazine, we young students at the University of San Carlos, and I remember asking for a poem from him. And that was the first time I got to read his works. Later on, I read his other works and also his fiction. He's quite good in the short story, the short story. And he had always been very modest. I found his works to have some kind of classical composure to them. His poems could not be considered experimental. They were quite traditional. And yet, it is clear that he had something to say. He also came to a point of developing a rather distinct voice, especially in his stories. I would consider his stories to be a greater accomplishment than his poetry. In fact, recently I was there during the launching of his book of short stories. I think a year ago. It was only a year ago, and I was surprised to see him after so many years that he has grown older. Of course, that also means that I've grown older myself. As opposed to his contemporaries, when I say contemporaries, I'm only talking about people who are a decade or 2 decades older than me. He was quite different in that he was very modest. I would emphasize that because most of his colleagues were a little, they were a rambunctious group. And Lam distinguished himself from being very quiet. He would just sit and then listen and only talk when talked to. I have a picture of him a few years ago. I look for it. And throughout the years, he had always been a colleague, especially in Batalan. I was president of Batalan in 1990 to 1992, and he had always been with us. Before that, I used to go with them in their discussions, with a little drinking on the side. And then after that, I lost track of him because I joined the Foreign Service and came back only 2 years ago. And that was when I saw his work. And I was so glad to know that he was going on. So the years that I was absent from the scene, something like 30 years, I got to know that he had continued with his writing, that he had kept the faith as a Filipino, as a Cebuano writer.
I first met your Lamberto Ceballos during an event at Ayala. It was a book launch, and he was one of the poetry readers. So there he read one of his poems. I have worked on your Lam's stories on children, and then I have read that his works are full of compassion. You can read it in the stories, that even if the stories are aimed for children, even the parents or the older people who read it to the children would learn a lot of things from the stories. Your Lam, when you look at him, he's such a small man, but you know that he has a very big heart and a very big dedication in his craft. So after all these years, even after working as a public accountant, he is still able to write and still continue to write his poetry and his fiction. And he is very strong in his advocacy in Cebuano literature. So he encourages the young writers and the seasoned writers to contribute to Super Balita, to have their works published so that they too may be able to practice their skills in writing, to be able to contribute to Cebuano literature as a whole. So Nyor Lam, other than his poetry and his writing and his fiction, he also does translations. So I also had the pleasure to have Nyor Lam in translation workshops from Cebuano to English. And he's very kind in helping other people honing their skills in writing.
Hi, I'm Trizer Mansueto. I'm currently affiliated here in UP Cebu. I'm with the College of Communication Arts and Design. I was one of the translators of Hunger in Nayawak together with Dr. Hope U, which was published many years ago. I didn't really know Nyor Lam. I only heard or I only read of his short stories from different publications, particularly from Bisaya magazine. I was really amazed with his works, but then some time ago I finally met the author when we translated his works into English. So it was a very good experience to translate Nyor Lam's works because basically because it's very it really portrays being a Cebuano. His stories tell of the life of people basically from the provinces, specifically from his hometown in Dalaget. Perhaps this is based on his experience. I really like Nyor Lam. He's very humble, and of course a very talented writer. Regarding his works, his works are easy read, and then of course, although his works would also help people, to revisit Cebuano because sometimes he uses words that are no longer used in present day Cebu, because basically our language is evolving man. So his works would actually help us not only appreciate the language but of course also appreciate being Cebuano, especially the life in the past, perhaps during the 60s, 70s, because these are actually the things that he portrayed in his works, in his short stories. So the excerpt I've chosen is an excerpt from Tinggutom sa Nayawak. Although I did not translate this, but I really love this story yun, sa libro. Milantaw si Manong Cardo sa halayong unahan, gikan sa buntod nakita niya ang dagat. Ibabaw sa dagat, nadapit ang iyang pagtagad sa usa ka pundok sa naglugitom nga mga panganod. May dagom sa dagat. May kangaya nga miukiok sa iyang galamhan. That's it. So it's actually a description of what he saw from a distance, which is actually it's really a very touching point in the story Tinggutom sa Nayawak, after the character realized Timoy was actually forced to steal his bananas, because his wife just recently gave birth to their third child. And then, of course, Timoy didn't have a choice but to steal those bananas. Otherwise, his family would not have anything to eat. I really enjoyed translating his works because foremost, it gave me chance to read his other works because due to this translation work, I was able to read some of his works because before that I only read a few. So I enjoyed it a lot because there, as I've mentioned, it's very easy read. Besides being easy read, his works are also, as I mentioned, very Cebuano. No, very Cebuano. It portrays the life of Cebuanos, particularly those living far away from Cebu, because most of his stories, no, the location is actually, or the locale is actually in Kawayan, Dalaget. The words he used were very common, but sometimes it's really very challenging because he used what we call Pasay Cebuano, no? Which we currently don't use anymore today. So that's very challenging. So that actually encouraged me, to look up the words in the dictionary, in the Cebuano Visayan dictionary. I would introduce him as a very great writer. If they want to know about the lives, of Cebuanos in the not so distant past, particularly the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, especially those of us who live in the city, I'd recommend them to read Nyor Lam's works because his works really portray the life of the people in the barrios during those times. This is very important because those who live today, or the young ones today, no longer have an idea, what life is, in the provinces, when life was still slow, when there were still a few people, when there were still lots of trees, his works definitely will resonate to the younger ones, because his works is, for me, they're actually timeless, especially because his works, it's actually filled with values, It's not actually just, these are not actually just stories, to entertain people, but these are also stories that have values in themselves, like in particular, Hunger in Nayawak itself, the story, ang kagutom, sa Nayawak. It's really laden with values. In fact, I encourage everybody to read it. I can actually compare this story with another work done by a Cebuano. Ang iyang setting was during the war. In short, it's really a very touching story. And this is something that the final, or the end of the story, you won't really expect kung unsay end sa story. So I'd encourage everybody to read his works, especially the story Hunger in Nayawak itself.
I'd like to begin by saying thank you for this opportunity to talk about Nyor Lam, or Lamberto Ceballos, because he's one of the writers whom I really look up to. I consider him as one of my mentors. For one, his stories has high entertainment value. I really appreciate how he created this different world in his stories, the world of Nayawak, which very recently I learned is just the reverse of Kawayan. So that's a very interesting fact for me, and I've always been interested in writers who created a series of stories, who wrote a series of stories centering around this a particular place, and he created this world of his own, not very different from ours, but entirely his as well. So ang kanang Nayawak, which is reverse of Kawayan, and also very recently I learned there's also his reverse of Pasil. So what's the reverse of Pasil? lisap, no? So again, that's one thing that I admire in his works. But more than as a mentor in his writing, he's also my mentor in translation, because translation is one of the things that I do, and I could very easily just email Nirlam, is this translation of this particular phrase correct? How should I translate this? So he would readily answer me, and even give me like encouragement and praise. Sakto na kaayo. It is very apt translation. Nindot na imong translation. This is very well done. And so I appreciated how he encourages me in my work as well, because he's very welcoming and he's really very willing and very ready to help me. Aside from that, he was also one of the resource person that I can readily ask to be part of a panel. No? So one time I organized a mini workshop for WILA members, Women in Literary Arts. We called it the Mini Paglambo because it was a pre-workshop before the big workshop. And so he was readily available for us, WILA members, when we workshopped this. And we were writing at that time. It was the very first workshop that we had flash fiction, because many of our writers then were writing poetry, and so the sentiment was, let's try another genre. So we decided, okay, since we wanted to do another genre, how about flash fiction? We don't have to write a very long story, just a little below 1,000 words. And so we were readily into the project. And then when I was thinking of persons to ask as a resource person, who best to ask, no? Then one of those who really came before us, and one of those who was very consistent with his work, consistently writing, consistently submitting works for the Palanca, and also consistently encouraging younger writers to continue writing. So Nirlam was there for us. Now, there was no hesitation at all when we asked him. When I asked him, please come and be one of the panelists, together with Ma'am Esther Tapia at the time and Noel Tuazon of Divine Word University in Bohol. Readily he said, yes, I want to be part of this. So these are the things that I would always remember of Nirlam, and would always cherish the moments that he would be there for us, and especially also for my translation. At the time when I was still starting as a translator, there was a insecurity on my part, thinking that my translation would not be as good. But when I asked him, he simply said, just continue translating, and that's very comforting for me. As a writer who was starting, as a translator who was still starting, it's a big thing that there's somebody there comforting you with, and encouraging you. You can make it. You can do it as long as you just continue. That's Nirlam for me.
I'm Heidi Palapar. I'm a member of the Women in Literary Arts Cebu Incorporated. Nirlam is one of the people that I really look up to, no, because he's one of the elders of Batalan ung halad sa dagang. He's also an editor of Sunstar Super Balita. I mentioned I look up to him because he's always there in the different literary activities such as workshops, readings. And everyone actually has something nice to say about Nirlam and about his works. So that actually also attracted my curiosity, and so I read up on him. And it was only right that he is actually seen as one of the pillars of Cebuano literature. it is interesting because you will see that the way Nyor Lam writes is actually that of traditional storytelling. It's like straightforward, but it's simple. You know, it's best read actually when it's you read the original in Cebuano. But it's also simple in the sense that what you see, it's really from the beginning until end. It's sort of chronological. You see that. And for me, that is fresh, because in a world now where there are many different ways to tell a story, you know? And for me, growing up in a time when there were already writers who were presenting a story in a different way or different ways, it's a fresh take for me, for someone who was not oriented to that kind of storytelling. So I really had fun reading it. Like I said, it should be read in Cebuano. The Cebuano story is really way, way better because there's something with the use of our native tongue. And even if it's in a traditional storytelling, you can still see the use of the different, the use of metaphors. You can see that in Nyor Lam's works. And what is also there is that I think this is something like a commitment on the part of Nyor Lam, that his stories have to impart a lesson. And some would say but the thing about literature is that everything should impart something significant about life. Otherwise, what is the worth of literature? Through the story, one has to get things that insights about life, and you can see that right away in the works of Nyor Lam. In fact, one of my favorite, and this became the titular story in the compendium of his works entitled Hunger in Nayawak and Other Stories. Ang Tinggutong sa Nayawak is my favorite. I don't know why, but it's the language and it's the setting. And it's very simple. The story is simple, but then there's a depth to it, especially when you reach to the end, the change in the character of the person. That's the beauty of the story, and how, of course, the insight of one's anger and how this anger can just really be dissipated when one realizes the background of the person to which the anger is directed to. I find that beautiful because the insights actually in Nyor Lam's stories is very much relevant in this time, all the more, I believe. So I think that's very important, and that what makes Nyor Lam's works significant to this time. And thus his stories should really be read by this generation and the next to come. Nyor Lam has one is that Nyor Lam's way of traditional storytelling. I have written certain works in that way. And I find it interesting that I come from this generation of storytellers who have used this kind of storytelling. And I'm very happy to have found sort of like a model in Nyor Lam. Second, Nyor Lam writes children's stories. And this is something that I'm going into now. I have written children's stories before, but knowing that Nyor Lam has written a lot of children's stories and I started reading them, I found it as also another model to my writing about children's stories in Cebuano. So for me, Nyor Lam's works have been a great help to my writing. They have informed my writing. The beauty there is that, of course, the characters are very Cebuano. Whether they're birds or animals, though, they're very Cebuano. In fact, I learned a lot when you read, like, for example, certain animals. And he gives you a lot of different animals. He introduces you to the different animals, the different species, for example, of birds. There's this story, Inday Siloy, he introduces you to different kinds of species. So you get to know a lot of things. Actually, it's not just in the children's stories, but also in his stories where you see a lot of Cebuano things there you never knew because, for example, I'm a city girl. So you are introduced to these things. The children's stories are, in a way, the way they should be written, no? But there's something about the Cebuano language, the way your lam uses the language that makes you want to read it. And I could even imagine, no, if I was a kid, or if I was somebody who's going to read the story to a kid, how would I best introduce or present the story to the kid? And so my brain was already running. If I were to translate this into one book, how would the illustrations be? I had gone into that already kind of thinking, no, because I was really amused at reading the stories, the children's stories of Nyor Lam. I have very few engagements with Nyor Lam, no, because there is something about him that it's not because he's not a person. He is very when you look at him, he's so gentle and so sweet. A person, he looks that way, and I'm pretty sure he is, because when the few times I have spoken with him, very soft spoken, and then smile as in Nyor Lam, no, he just smiles. There's something about Nyor Lam nga kanang I can understand why from such a person ing ani ang iyahang sinuwatan. This is the way he writes, and this is how this is his voice, no, this is the way he speaks it through his stories. And I can actually see the connection with that to his personality. I think this is the kind of person who believes in morals. No? He believes in really saying his piece. Maghilom-hilom lang na siya sa kilid. And he's very supportive, by the way. I know because when he's always there in the different literary activities there are. And at the same time, even if you post works or even about your life itself, no, he makes little comments, and that's his way of supporting you. Mo smile as in Nyor Lam, he just smiles, and it tells you actually that that's the way he supports. And he's there. The presence lang ni Nyor Lam, that's his way of showing that he's really there for the younger generation of writers. This is someone who writes or preserves, no, the traditional storytelling, how Cebuanos really tell stories of old, and he has preserved that. So in a sense, the Cebuano heritage has been preserved and promoted through Nyor Lam's works. And I say that it's not just about the way he writes his stories, but also because through his stories, there are many things there Cebuano that you don't hear anymore today, but he's able to document it through the stories. And what is important also is that he is able to tell us through the stories what really is Cebuano. This is how the Cebuano is. This is his values. This is the way he sees the world. He is able to preserve that because truly the works of Nyor Lam is Cebuano. That's all I can say. Cebuano gyud kaayo si Nyor Lam.
I'm Joshua Cabrera. I'm former president of Bathalad and also a cartoonist, and also writing poems and short stories and comics. I was also working for 20 years in Sunstar as a cartoonist and art chief. I met Lamberto Ceballos when I joined Bathalad. Nyor Lam is a very humble person, no? Despite of his huge contribution for the Cebuano literature, and he's also a multi-awarded writer, creative writer, local and national awards. No? So he's one of the writers that inspired me to write, no, because I read some of his stories and I like the setting he usually use, no, in his stories, because I also came from the province and his works are also about experiencing the experiences in the provincial milieu, no? So that's he's one of the writers that really inspired me to write about my place in Maasin, Southern Leyte, about my hometown, Maasin, Southern Leyte. Nurlam is a very quiet person. No, he's not a typical Bathalad person. No, when we are drinking, we have together, we only drink one bottle of beer. Then you cannot even notice that he's around. No, you can. But if you ask him something, he will answer really with sincerity. No, and keep on encouraging young writers to keep on writing. So Nurlam really is a great inspiration among young writers. No, and he's also even me. No, during the time when I was still very young and aspiring to become a writer. His writing is I've said it's very provincial. The setting, it's very, the images is very clear, are very clear. You can, he can really capture spirit of the setting, the characters, relate with the characters. No, the characters are very relatable because dimensional siya. It's not flat, and he's very familiar with local images, local color. No, when he talk about toys made from coconut leaves, no, and from organic materials, no, it's very detailed, and how on the narrative is very detailed, so you can really see the object he's trying to portray in the story, and he's very grounded. You can really say that he experienced what he was writing. And also I know Nurlam very much because he's also a colleague of mine. We both working with Sunstar for a certain length of time. And in fact, he was always asking me to submit poems or short stories for Super Balita. Really, it's like a father to everyone. Ungo sa San Pilar, no? The visuals are really very... I'm a visual artist, I'm a cartoonist, so that's why I'm very much into images, into imagery. So that's why I like his work very much. The Ongo sa San Pilar is very visual. It's clearly picture out. It's clearly showing the landscape in the province, and the details are very clear. You can really experience what he's writing. His poetry, his short stories. I find out through his works. I realized that my experience in the province also very valuable, and it's a very important thing also to write about our hometown. It also inspires me to draw folkloric stories and make a storybook out of it. I would encourage them to read his works, so that they can understand Nurlam and his importance in Cebuano literature, and how he was able to contribute in the development of Cebuano language and literature. For me, the works of Nurlam is also a good representation of culture and heritage. It pictures out where we came from, as an authentic Cebuano experience or Bisaya experience. I think the young generation would love him.
So Lam can be considered as part of the Cebuano literary canon because of his mass appeal as well as his versatility. So each of Ceballos' work has received acclamation from his peers, winning the Ludabi, Bathalad Cebu, Bathalad Mindanao, Lunsang Bisaya Incorporated, Women in the Literary Arts Cebu, and the Children's Story Prize. Governor Pablo Garcia Literary Award, and there was even of course, the Don Carlos Palanca Memorial Literary Awards for Literature. And he also got the Gawad Commission ng Wikang Filipino, So, he was pambansang alagad ni Balagtas. If we talk about mass appeal may not be always the deciding factor by which, authors continue to be studied. But those that obtain a place in the canon and garner mass acclaim can reveal historical relevance. And the reason behind Lamberto Ceballos' popularity is that his writing of the human condition is precisely both Cebuano and general to people everywhere. I would say that his critical appeal provides insight to his place in Cebuano literature, despite the fact that he is not quite well known in the classrooms as authors whose writings have been for a long period of time. But now we have two of his books already, translations of his books, Hunger in Ayawak and Other Stories. And recently, I think a couple of years ago, we came out with a publication. I translated his short stories into English. Short stories for children, And so he is a voice in mainstream Cebuano literature. I would not say that his works are not autobiographical, but that his works contain reflections of his life. And integrating his life with fiction is something that he has in common with a few writers, or rather with many writers. Of course, you get parts and pieces and then put them into your fiction. So in fact, very few writers would ask that autobiographical truth should be verifiable. In Hunger in Ayawak, Ceballos integrates the right amount of fact and fiction to create some of the honest contemporary work to come about in the last 30 years. And he uses his life as the skeleton for his fiction. And his work can at times be considered autofiction. And recognizing the significance of autofiction in these stories is necessary, as Lamberto Ceballos' connection to culture, both Cebuano and the popular, influences the stories he writes. Aside from his poetry or short, he also has, poetry, he has short stories, children's stories, and essays that have been anthologized in various books and magazines. He had published several novels. Yes, novels, such as Ayaw na Ako Ihatag sa Lain, Kun Manluod na Ang Kasing-Kasing, and Luha sa Kagabhion. And there is another one that I am also starting to translate, although the progress is a bit slow, Ang Unang Asawa ni Domino. And these were all serialized in the Bisaya. And he has another one, Gugmang Way Pagbasol, which came out in a book. Balik sa Sabakan sa Gugma, which was published by Sunstar. Pilion ko ang gugma mo, also by Sunstar, and they were published as pocket books. But would you believe, they were under the pseudonym of Jasmine Castillo. So this is a pseudonym of Lam Ceballos, Jasmine Castillo. And he does not allow historical or popular culture to dominate his story because he never uses them as more than just a reflection of the time period where he exists within, and a reflection of, the characters. His focus instead is on the characters and the aspect of community, and without historical and cultural references, the community would seem less real. But if he were to take them any further, they would overwhelm the purpose of the story. Ceballos is different from many authors because he allows historical and cultural events to simply exist within the work. It's just like naturally there, rather than questioning them. So culture becomes very important to this collection of stories, like the Tinggutom sa Nayawak or Hunger in Nayawak, for instance, because that is what I think about when I discuss this concept of community, because the influence that it has on the characters and the way that they understand the world around them. So I'll give you an example. Drought hits Kawayan, which is a town, when Ceballos was just a young child. So this is the name of the town, Kawayan. This historical event is situated in his story, Hunger in Nayawak. So if we reverse Kawayan, we have Nayawak. So he purposely reverses Kawayan to read as Nayawak to change the location. Or, like he has snippets of war that figure in his short story, Memories Do Not Set with the Sun in Bulugan. As culture encompasses a wide variety of concepts, we have Taylor's definition, and he says the culture seems to be the most exact without narrowing the concept beyond recognition as we know it, like in our social studies. Culture is that complex whole which includes knowledge, beliefs, arts, morals, law, customs, and other capabilities and habits acquired by man as a member of society. Throughout the story, Ceballos creates intricately woven lots that are rich with culture, including politics, ethics, family, popular culture, and historical events. And the stories, for instance, in Hunger in Nayawak, provide different depictions of gender. So this is one thing that's really interesting too. If there is a persistent theme in social science, depictions of Cebuano male, it is that the male dominance is ingrained as a cultural trait, what you would say as, machismo. So the Cebuano male has come under scrutiny in the past several decades, especially in works of Cebuano writers and critics. However, often recognize only the flaws of the male characters, and it is an interesting trend considering the writers themselves are usually less biased than the critics. The stereotypes, as with female stereotypes, have haunted also Cebuano culture for decades, and the characters of Ceballos may not always fit these stereotypes, but they are always aware of them. So, you could say that although the purpose of, talking about this with a focus on community and not on the Cebuano cultural view of gender, the impact of this view of men and women have on the community and the interaction of like the community members is quite broad. So studies could be done. Sorry, this is the part of me that's the academic, all right? Studies could be done on the male and the female figures that appear in the story, but in order for one to understand the inner workings of the community presented, it is important to study the men and women as they relate to each other, to other men and to other women, while examining how the narrators react to these characters in a way that reconstructs these myths. Ceballos gives two very different views in the story. Let me recall, there is a story in The Road to Darkness and another story, Ang Kukok of Santikon. Also another story. So these are three stories. Across the moments of emptiness, you should get a copy of, Hunger in Ayawak. I'm not trying to plug, but it's really rich. You have in the stories male characters that fit the stereotypes, and characters are one-dimensional. While in the other stories, the figures are fully realized human beings that both fit the stereotype and move away from it. One of the problems that seem to appear within the stories is the difference in how men and women view and partake of love. So I mentioned the Kukok of Santikon because Ceballos writes of men who love in a different way. The character Ardabo does not control his feelings. He desires, he lusts after this woman character Marjing, only to later discover that she is a prostitute. And what other story is this? Across moments of emptiness. Yes. The character there, Manolo, acts like a macho husband who, comes home and when he wishes and does not really care about his family except for the financial support he lent to them. So characters like this, they're really like interesting. Or, you have Ingkong Estong, because I was thinking like, what did Nyor Lam do with this name? Ingkong Estong, who understands a younger husband's dilemma in there's time for recompense. And so he denies himself the glory of winning a race to give way to the needs of another man. So you have a kind of sacrifice there. And another character, Iyo Buloy, who is devoted to the memory of his dead wife and does not mind the repulsion the townspeople of San Pilar have for him so long as he fulfills his promise to keep her near him. And this is what you have in the Ungo of San Pilar, or the Witch of San Pilar. And a lot of the conflict in the intimate relations between men and women arise from the way or the differences both in the way that they love and the way that they understand love. So, in order to understand the men as characters, it is also important to understand their interactions with the community. And, there are attributes of machismo that are not necessarily a negative influence on the men, such as the sense of, maintaining honor and integrity. Ceballos writes about men who attempt to nurture also and protect their families and communities. And you have this in, what was the story? Hunger Inayawak, the character of Manong Cardo. Or, you have Dr. Gustavo, who is a character in The Real Identity of the Real Identity of Amadix. Yes. So, Manong Cardo reacts with anger and suspicion at the theft of his bananas, at a time of famine, because, everybody was hungry and somebody, steals, but gives in to the humanitarian call when confronted by the hunger of his neighbor. So he just lets it go. And if you think about, Dr. Gustavo Vidal, he demonstrates fatherly affection for his invention, because he invents a son. So in the stories, Ceballos humanizes the men by showing their negative actions and reactions, as well as their valuable responses and choices. So it's kind of balanced, no? And we must not forget that, as I mentioned earlier, he writes short stories for children, which emerged from the inspiration drawn during the seminar workshop that the Cultural Center of the Philippines introduced in Cebu City. He mentioned this in an earlier interview. It was in the 1980s, and he heeded the call to write children's stories that would encourage the youth with proper values and a good moral education in a workshop like the National Artist for Literature, Virgilio Almario, and the renowned poet and fictionist Don Pagusara. And we have a few of these children's stories anthologized in, as I said, the stories of Lolo Berto, which I translated and was published by the University of San Carlos Press. So the art of storytelling, especially to children, is in every culture, and literature, film, music, and the art are shaping and creating culture constantly through the stories that they tell. So before the invention of records and cameras, and storytelling was important than it is now. So you had the oral storytelling was a strong tradition among the communities and passed on through the histories of their families from generation to generation, and the myths of the different tribes. So it's a human endeavor more than ever. And I remember that Ceballos said that collective memory is shared by all of us, and the stories told several years ago speak to something deep within ourselves that help us to understand ourselves. Yes, and I believe that. So storytelling connects people to one another and allows for the collective memory of, here in this case, Cebuanos, to continue to exist. And in the act of, storytelling and how it relates to the content of the stories, it is important to understand the way in which the elements of the structures work. So his stories demonstrate the way in which writing is a discourse, and he tells the stories of his culture, the Cebuano culture, and Ceballos tells them in his own voice and through the experiences of those around him. Reflective of Ceballos and his writing, his characters also represent Cebuanos and at times Filipinos in general. So through the act of storytelling, humans can learn to understand one another and learn from history, what has been told about in the previous generations. So the belief in the importance of storytelling followed Cebuanos all the way from the old times to the 21st century which is our century. And we can say that Nyor Lam's writing often draws on the tradition of that oral storytelling, as narrators do not simply tell a story, but they converse with their audiences. So sometimes when they ask me why I love to read, I don't know if you have this experience, but when I read a piece of literature, it's as if I have a one-on-one conversation with the writer who is, just in front of me, albeit it's the page. It's just a page. It's not really, the person there, but that's how it is. So the stories in his works, please read Hunger in Ayawak, please buy, and the stories of Lolo Berto, they contain a lot of interesting, facets. For the scholar, you can talk about, diegetic narrators. The choices of narrators in Ceballos, will cause his audience to become more emotionally attached to the story than if the narrator were removed from the story. And the characters may tell their stories of the community and their nation, but they also complete the act by adding into the ever-growing narrative. So what has been said about, stereotypes of people who are ostracized from society because they seem to be like witches, a recluse, and they seem to be dubious characters. But there's more to add about this by showing different examples. And because, if you look at Ceballos, the children and animal characters, yes, he has animal characters too, tell their stories in an order that is meaningful to them. And the moment of acceptance is not revealed until the end of the story. But the narrators choose to accept their responsibility. Okay. The act of telling children's stories are not simply about didactic themes, but also about making sure that these themes will be remembered. So storytelling, in essence, becomes the vessel through which children can find entertainment and values. And the narrators then become the guards of the vessel, passing along stories when necessary. And Nyor Lam, through his beautiful weaving of stories and characters, revealed to us one of the most important human truths. And that is that literature has the capability of teaching, which is that only through remembering the stories can we truly move on from the past. So I hope you read Lamberto Ceballos' short stories and his novels, and a lot of this can be found at the Cebuano Studies Center, because something that you may not know, Nyor Lam is a keeper of information. He's actually a kind of institutional memory. So he has lodged with the center his collection regarding Bathalad activities. He has lodged with us his complete manuscripts. And I personally am looking forward to bringing the rest of his stories, his narratives, to the world through translation for those who are not able to read in Cebuano. Thank you very much.